Watch Jaquez take this hit. You see him? There's very few players that can take that.
Not everyone's born to be a star. And that's precisely the biggest problem with the American development system. Players grow up being the stars of their teams during high school and, to a lesser extent, college years. But this is a role that, in most cases, can't be transferred to professional basketball. Because how many true superstars are there in the NBA? About 15, maybe 20? We're talking about the elite amongst the greatest talents in the world. Expectations that are not realistic even for some of the best prospects of each generation. That's why the case of Jaime Jaquez Jr. is exceptional and is paving the way for new prospects to follow in his footsteps. His story? No. It's not like the rest of the rookies. Jaime Jaquez Jr. was born in Irvine, California in February 2001. He was the oldest of three siblings, Marcos and Gabriela, in a family that loved basketball. In fact, Jaime Jr. was the third generation of his family to play college basketball. His paternal grandfather, Ezekiel Jaquez, played at Northern Arizona University, and his father, Jaime Jaquez Sr., was a player at Concordia University, as was his mother, Angela. And although Jaime Jr. also had some adventures with baseball during high school, he ultimately decided to focus on the hardwood. The forward attended his hometown high school, Camarillo High School, and soon found himself in an important role on the basketball team. During his freshman year, he averaged 15.3 points, 10 rebounds, 2.3 assists, and 2.6 steals per game. Very good numbers for a young man who was facing much older opponents at the time. And although he started his high school career as an excellent role player, he soon took the reins of the team. During his sophomore year, his scoring average rose to 24 points per game, and during his senior year, he ended up averaging almost 32 points per night. This was the year in which Jaime achieved his greatest team success, achieving a record of 25 wins and 4 losses, and winning, for the first time in Camarillo's history, the Coastal Canyon League title. Far from the stellar recruiting stats we usually see with other NBA players, Jaime received a 4-star rating and an 83 rating by ESPN experts after finishing high school. He barely made it into the ESPN Top 100 and, by some miracle, was ranked 95th overall. But that didn't stop him from receiving offers from Georgetown, Memphis, Oregon State, Pepperdine, Stanford, USC, and Utah. However, the offer that convinced the young man of Mexican descent was the one from UCLA. On August 5, 2018, he confirmed his decision and committed to playing under Mick Cronin, who had just replaced Steve Alford as head coach of the Bruins. Despite the fact that Alford was actually one of the main reasons Jaquez decided on UCLA, this did not affect his decision. And after 6 games as a bench piece, in which he only managed to score 10 points in total, Jaquez finally got the chance to have a great game against Chaminade. The forward had 17 points and 12 rebounds, shooting 8 of 11 from the field, and his performance convinced Cronin to give him the opportunity to become a starter, a decision that the coach would never regret. Jaquez began to become a prototypical player that's seeing so much success in the modern NBA. A good defensive player capable of rebounding, and who demonstrates the ability to adapt to any system. But Jaime was far removed from his high school days when he was the first offensive option. Jaime knew that, just like at the beginning of his high school career at Camarillo, he had to become an elite role player in order to reach professional basketball. During his freshman year, Jaquez averaged 9 points and 5 rebounds per game, numbers that progressively increased as his long college career progressed, which lasted the full 4 seasons. Jaime knew that if he could progress during his time at UCLA, he would maximize his chances of making it to the NBA. But he still had a lot of work ahead of him. His scoring ability increased over time, 12 points per game during his sophomore year, which increased to 14 during his junior year, and 18 during his senior year. Not only did he become the Bruins' leading scorer, but one of their most efficient ones, as well as the team's top rebounder. But what would attract most scouts from NBA franchises was his exceptional basketball IQ. After his 4th season at UCLA, Jaquez was automatically eligible for the 2023 draft. However, there were certain factors that limited where he'd be selected. First of all, Jaquez was not able to show much progress from long range in his 4 seasons in Division I. With the exception of his sophomore year, in which he managed to shoot just under 40% from 3-point range, he wasn't able to hit 32% in any of his other 3 seasons. That, coupled with his age of 22, which is usually a disadvantage for NBA franchises that prefer to develop talent on their own, led the mocks to place him at the end of the first round. But Andy Ellisberg, GM of the Miami Heat since just before the 2023 draft, had another take on the forward. Andy, who had been Pat Riley's right-hand man for the past 28 years, selected Jaquez with the 18th pick in the draft, in what at the time seemed like a reach. But the truth is that the franchise, with Spoelstra's help, has turned the Mexican-American into a fundamental piece for the future of the roster. Coach Spo recently said of the UCLA alumni, "Right now, if you're not a number one option as a freshman and you're a 5-star recruit, you're either transferring or you're declaring. You're not really developing any kind of grit or learning a role or embracing a role the way Jaime did. He had a different kind of path that we respect." Despite his flaws, Jaime's a player with extraordinary qualities. He's not an exceptional three-point shooter, but he's a constant threat from mid-range. In post-ups and fadeaways, the player's able to stretch the floor with ease, even if he doesn't have the same gravity as players specialized in the long range. And while by far he's not the fastest forward in the league, he is one of the strongest. He's not afraid of contact, is a good finisher, and above all has good instincts. Ingredients that certainly fit the Heat's culture. But beyond the potential fit Jaquez was going to be for Spoelstra, the forward exceeded all expectations placed on him. His averages of 13.7 points, 3.7 rebounds, and 2.7 assists per game in 30 minutes of play have allowed him to rise to third place in the NBA rookie ladder, behind only the two giants Wemby and Chet, who are poised to become generational talents. Averages that rise to 16 points per game if we eliminate the first regular season games, which served him to adapt to the pace of the league, including a game of 31 points and 10 rebounds in the victory over the Philadelphia 76ers on Christmas Day. But Jaime's significance goes far beyond his enormous influence in Miami since his freshman year. Jaime's grandfather, who we talked about at the beginning of the video, emigrated from Mexico to the United States to begin his college basketball career. That's why Jaquez Jr., to this day, can be considered the most influential Mexican descendant basketball player in NBA history. Yeah, it may seem like an exaggeration just 30 games into his professional career, but that's the way it is. Juan Toscano Anderson is the only Mexican player currently on an NBA roster, and the rest of his compatriots have never had much significance. Eduardo Najera, Horacio Lamas, Jorge Gutierrez, and Gustavo Ayon are the only Mexicans who have made it to the best league in the world, and Earl Watson is undoubtedly the most successful Mexican descendant in NBA history. However, and despite having managed to stay in the league for 13 seasons in Watson's case, none of them achieved a higher scoring figure than Jaquez is achieving this year. Continents such as Europe and Africa have managed to generate talent over the last few decades that's ended up reaching the elite of the basketball world. However, in the case of Latin America, there's always been a monopoly of Argentina and, to a lesser extent, Brazil. The home of Manu Ginobili's been the only country capable of assiduously exporting players who have reached the NBA, and even managed to win the gold medal in the 2004 Olympic Games. But in the globalized world in which we live, it's to be expected that this process will continue to advance in countries without such a basketball tradition. That's why the career of Jaime Jaquez Jr. can be decisive and influential in a different way than the rest. First, for the Miami Heat, who have trusted in the prospect when the rest of the teams were more reluctant to do so, and he's giving them spectacular results. Second, for the country of Mexico, which despite being a neighbor of the United States and even having hosted some regular season games, has never seen basketball as a viable option. And finally, for all of Latin America, a series of broken barriers that can multiply the influence of the NBA in an area of the world that's not yet embracing basketball fully. And all because of a player who's been a pioneer in many aspects. For a player who faithfully represents the role player concept, his biggest role is yet to come.